for instance, if we're doing like a hero sculpt, and as you're working, if you accidentally, I don't know, dynamically subdivide, let's assume I'm working with like ZBrush here, right? Like just twice, you accidentally hit it twice, and then it saves, and then it crashes. You can't undo that anymore because the crash is part of your history. You have to now go through a painstaking process of re-Dynamax, or you got to tessellate, and you got to like change all the wireframe, and it wrecks your detail, and like it's a pain in the ass. Excuse my language, but it's difficult even for artists. What the file management would let you do is to say, I'm going to save it. I'm uploading at the end of the day. Here's my version for today. We're now version 1.3. This has these director's notes about the base shape of this character model. And then so you can actually record what you did every day or every time you submit, like a dev change log. What do you know about file management?
I know that if you don't do file management in a way where everybody understands it and does it together, it turns a project into a dumpster fire because nobody knows where things are supposed to go. Nobody knows what things are supposed to be. And it just continues to spiral out of control from there.
What are you saying? It's hard to remember which one is final version 2, this one final, don't touch, final version 6.
Yeah, or like Greg's file and
Greg's file, yeah.
You know, Greg needs it because it's really important to get all of his code to work, but nobody else knows what Greg's file is or how to reference it.
Just like what was it? It's not Portal. There was one of the games where it was somebody had a GIF of like a potato, and for however the engineer used that image right inside of the code, if you deleted it, like a bunch of systems stopped working. Nobody knew why, so they just left it in there. And it was, that's all I remember from that story. I can't even remember who was telling me about it. But okay, so it sounds like you've run into a few file disasters, right? In your time.
We also learned a little bit about it in school when we were doing like the 3D game animation, where if we were working on a project and we started naming the file different things, and even something where it's like I'm trying to remember what version to revert back to when you found problems also became chaotic. And, you know, for a while, I'm like, oh, whatever, just saving things here and there. And eventually it's like, crap, I don't know, just delete everything.
I think that's like totally off topic, but it's an interesting thing to talk about with file management because so much stuff you toss in there thinking it's relevant or important, and then you realize nobody's touched it in years because it didn't add anything. It just had relevance at the time, but it wasn't like a long-term thing. So for a little context for everybody, we're talking about, you know, the file management, and basically it's boring, it's tough to manage, it's hard to get right, and it's the difference between shipping a game and losing months of work in not just my opinion, but industry standard. Like anybody outside of a solo developer, and I would say most solo developers will also tell you the same thing, because we have all been on that receiving end of you open up your project and something's corrupted and now nothing opens and all your files are locked behind a software project you can't open anymore, and it's just not fun.
I'm assuming new solo developers that would say, nah, it's not a problem. They just haven't been developing long enough. Or they're bad developers.
They just haven't run into it, right? Like that's usually what it is. Because I've met them. I've met some where they're like, I don't know why you making me do this. And I'm like, look, I know you're unhappy, but you're going to do it because we're consulting, you're paying money. You're not going to not do what I tell you, but do it. And then like, sure enough, you know, somewhere down the line, not all of them, but most of them have come back and been like, hey, you know, that conversation we had about like Perforce, and from there, it's usually one of two things. Is one, I didn't listen and I kind of got screwed over. You were right. Or the other side is, oh my God, I lost everything. Thank you so much for making me do this because I just had to like pull project and it was fine. I reverted to the last submit and like everything is fine. My God, I had such a huge heart attack, you know. And those are such huge extremes that unfortunately a lot of times if you don't know about them or have experienced one of them, you just don't think it's ever going to be an issue.
So then, James, how do we make it not an issue?
By making sure you properly back up your files. Now, there's a process, there's a way, right? I think that, well,
so when you say file management, you're not just talking about like where we save it and how we save it. It's also like, as in like file names and like folder positions. This is also like backing up files, making sure things are done in a way where we can recover stuff.
Yeah, it's the procedure, right? So a lot of
Oh,
times,
I had no idea that was part of file management.
yeah, it's well, it's your oh, hell, what's it called? The ICC or whatever. It's the person who basically handles the structure of like your project management. So often in bigger studios and teams, that's like your build manager is usually they're incorporated in the same roles because it's the same person who has to create a build and upload it and make sure it goes to the right servers, client stuff, Steam, etc. So often those roles have had a bit of like crossover, but specifically what your person who's handling file management does is they're just making sure everything is submitted properly. Everybody's following naming conventions, all this boring stuff we're talking about, but they're maintaining, the life of your project.
The life of the project is file management. I never thought I would have heard that.
Well, we talk a lot about how game development is like a web, right? Like all modular systems and architecture and thinking ahead of what you want to do and how do you like program for it now and make it open and not art and etc. But all of those decisions live somewhere. And they live somewhere not just in a Word doc, right? Or pen and paper, whatever. Like they actually exist as something you're going to compile into an executable, excuse me, that goes on Steam for download and distribution, etc. Epic Game Store, doesn't really matter the platform. But anyways, so you need somebody who needs to make sure that that web that's hanging up there in the void that has all of your ideas and all of your work is healthy. Like somebody has to go through once in a while and just give it a little routine check and be like, what's in here? What's there? And a part that's missed in that is also making sure that risks are removed. Like, is there a corrupt file? Cool, let's kill it. Let's get it out of here before it like corrupts something else. Like we don't want something that has massive memory leak problems for a developer to leave it in there and it's accidentally referenced somewhere else in the project and then that causes a major memory or power spike and now you burnt out RAM because of it's overloaded or that's an extreme scenario, but
Is that
that's
kind of like
part of
why
that
we'll
process.
see like an update come in on Steam, for example, and they'll be like, "Yeah, like new update is just bug fixes and this memory leak fix." Is it like that's just kind of where that sometimes that's where that comes from?
Kind of like the actual fix still comes from the developer or the artist or whoever, right? But the file management is where all your fixes go in a repository, like a library. As you make new deposits, right, you're adding new things to your library, you slowly build up your project. Now, eventually, you're going to add something that breaks something else, or it's going to cause a corruption, or you did something wrong, or maybe you did something right, but we got to change decisions. And then, a couple months down the road, your director's like, hey, remember that thing you did? Do you still have it? Because we found a use for it, or maybe we should go that way, you were right or we were wrong, etc. Like who knows, right? Now the file management is that process of keeping a library of every single change, and then that allows you to go back. So if your newest version crashes big time and it corrupts the project, it's fine, it's safe, because you could still go back a version before you added that file or whatever file triggered the crash, and then just start from there. You don't have to start from the beginning again.
So it sounds like there's the workplace where we're developing stuff and writing code and making new files and putting stuff in and testing the game and then getting everything working, and then there's like another section, another thing where this is like where everything's been like looked through, compiled, named properly, put in places where it's supposed to be, and they're two separate entities.
Yeah, kind of. It's I don't know how do I better explain that. Yeah, your file management is just like your repository. It's literally a library. Whenever you go to work, file management, like typical process, whether you're using different softwares, which we'll talk about, it's about going in and grabbing a book. We'll refer to it as a book for this is your art asset, your code asset, whatever that you're in charge of. You're literally going to
Like each book
check
is
it
like
out
a
of the
file.
library. Yeah, you're going to check that out of the library and say, this is mine. Nobody else can work on it. Nobody else can make additions to the project, to this file, as long as I have it checked out, because it's mine. I have ownership on it. When I'm done my changes, I'm going to submit it and put it back on the shelf in the library. And then another dev can basically go to the library and say, hey, I want to get all the latest updates. And then all those files download onto their workstation, and then they can grab that file once you're done with it again and continue working. That's the other critical thing that file management is for, is especially when you're working with teams bigger than, I would say bigger than 2, but you could probably get away with 4 people, right? Big teams, 5 and up, you definitely should have Perforce or GitHub or some form of file management software just to prevent that conflict. If you and I both check out the same file, I make something red, you make a different part green, we can't just save it, right? One of
I'm
those
assuming
files
whoever
has to be
saves
the
last is
master.
the one that keeps it.
Well, yes and no. See, this is where the software side of it gets a little tricky, because if you're building something that relies on a component, right, and you tie that into your code, your blueprints, your scripting, and then I'm working on something where I'm only changing the colors, right? So if you save it and then I save it, it doesn't just save my color changes, right? It will remove any of the changes you did in that session as well. So all of your component tie-ins and everything else, that'll just get removed, or vice versa. It'll happen to me. Whereas, like, you might submit, I'll go to submit and it'll say, hey, I don't know what this file is. Right. So you could end up with a duplicate file. Like, that doesn't really happen anymore because the software is really good, but that used to happen where it's like, I don't know what this is. We're going to make this a version 2, but because it's slightly different, we're not going to call it a version 2. And then you just have random crap that's just broken. Right. But yeah, so that in essence is what version control is: file management. It's controlling the version of your files and keeping a backup, so you can always go back a step if you need.
Okay, yeah, this is very different than what I expected file management was going to be. That's cool.
Yeah, in a more complicated sense, it also, and this is where it ties into build management, it also allows you to create specific ecosystems in software, like think like a silo of, this is the development build. This is where we put all our cheat codes, all of our debugs, all of our print messages and our logs and our analytics for testing software and hardware and performance and yada, yada, so on and so on. And then you have a shipping build, right? Which is, no, this is the build with all the editor junk removed, and it is purely the game. And so it's lightweight. It's how a game goes from like 120 gigs down to like 14. And right, it's just the essence of the game, and that's it. And then that's the one that you will typically send out for certification or approval on platforms, and that'll eventually go out to be sold, viewed, demoed, etc. on Steam, Epic Game Store, Microsoft Store, so on. So, and it, to take that even further in terms of like the complexity of the role, I guess, you get into platform specific builds. So you have your development environment, then you have your shipping builds, and then you have a shipping build for each individual target, let's say, platform, right? So in Unreal, that's something as like target platforms you choose. Is this an Android? Is it mobile? Is it PC? All of those things create a different kind of build that's process, compile, compress, all according to the platform needs. And so file management allows you to very easily say, okay, this build is for the Nintendo Switch because we totally killed a ton of cool stuff, but we had to do that. Otherwise, it would not run on the Switch. You don't want to confuse that with your build that you have for, say, Steam or for Sony, because they're totally different needs, right? Sometimes you have to completely rebuild features just to suit a platform. So you want to be able to have a way to just say, like, this is the Switch build, this is the PlayStation build. And then that way that allows your core development to stay in your development build, where you just tinker and make everything work. And then you can like modify as needed. And it cascades from one build all the way down to shipping, so that everything's in line, everything's working, everything is maintained.
Because I'm assuming that comes into play just because like hardware and however they like consoles, each console has its own different things that it can do. Just like how with like computers, there's so many different types of hardware where sometimes there'll be like updates or changes that come out where it's just like, hey, this is just affecting all AMD graphics cards or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly why. And yeah, like being able to manage that's important. And as a consumer or just a developer, if you're ever looking at a project and you see we're announcing a port from this game to this other game and it takes like 3 years, well, yeah, it's because they didn't really version control any of that. They didn't plan for that. So now they have to do a full not a rebuild, but they got to refactor the entire project and figure out, okay, how do we build for this target? How do we get basically permission certification from the platform to make sure our game is ready for their audience, right? And so often what'll happen is a game company won't take that kind of information into consideration early. And then when it's time to port, or the opportunity comes along, I should say, they have to give it to a different company and just say, look, we are not equipped. Here's the repository, here's the game. We need you to take this PC game and make it Steam Deck friendly, which is Linux. And like there's a lot of complexities with that.
It sounds like
Anyways,
something where if you're making a game and you know you want it to be on multiple platforms, you're planning from the start for this.
you should be. You
And so
should be.
Okay, then I can see where more of this file management comes in importance then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you should see a bit of a theme we have running here with everything we're doing at Indie Innovators, right? Which is like making sure you know where you're going, what's your target, because it's going to dictate a lot of stuff along the way. You just don't know. And yeah, this is
I
a
thought that
great
was like a
example of that.
later in development kind of thing where you're like, we got most of the game ready, we like this. Now what platforms are we gonna put it on?
No, it's day one. Day one. Like your high concept when because I know we had the same class when we did like early game design, like high concepts and stuff like that, right? And even then, one of the questions that was kind of industry standard, even back then, was what's your target platform? What's your target audience? That's why that stuff matters, right? And that's also why a lot of indies really struggle to understand why their pitches don't go anywhere, because they will say things like, yeah, we don't really know which platforms we're going to be on, but we'd love to be on the Switch, Steam Deck, and PC. Those are all three wildly different builds in like the engineering, like how you actually make that game. So when you go to a publisher and you're like, hey, I only need 200,000 for my team to build this over, let's say, a year and a half. We're going to be kind of scrappy and frugal and we can get this done. Like, yes, maybe for one platform. You don't have the experience or the background, obviously, to know the requirements for all three platforms, let alone develop them simultaneously, right? So you're not going to get funding. You're just not going to get it because the publisher's going to look at you and be like, no, that's 200,000 for like one, like each maybe. Like, so you should be asking like 600,000. Is this game going to generate that kind of revenue across three platforms? Probably not. You're not going to, right? So it's just like it knocks you down a step every single time when you're seeking funding. So
like making a first game, I couldn't imagine knowing this now. It's like I'm making it one platform, not putting it on any of the others, and then when I make another game, maybe I'll do a different platform and try that out.
Yeah, conventional advice is to just build a Steam game, a computer game. Don't worry about any of the other platforms. Steam has some of the most relaxed rules when it comes to uploading a game. You're just like, here's some core stuff, no malware. Like, be upfront about AI. Here you go, right? $120. Here's your listing. I think it's 120. It depends on your regional pricing, but yeah, that in essence is how that goes. Is when you're an indie and you're making your first game, you want the lowest barrier entry point, and that immediately rules out pretty much every other platform. You might be able to do VR. I take that back. You could probably do VR and maybe mobile if you stuck to Android only, because the rules and like your constraints are still relatively simple and like contained. It's easy enough to follow along what you need to build that. But if you're doing a PC game that also has a VR component, like no, that's too much. It's too hard. You need somebody who's experienced in at least one of those platforms, having released a game. Not successful, mind you, but like they have to have gone through the process of knowing what that involves, developing for a platform. And Steam, or just PC in general, is the easiest one to not know what to do.
So how do we do this then? How do we prepare ourselves for good file management?
Yeah, okay. So file management.
Unless there's another step we need to talk about before.
There's always more stuff. There's always more stuff. But yeah, it's beyond the folders and beyond the files, right? What we're really talking about is version control systems. I kind of said that a little bit earlier, but it's that idea of thinking about it like a library. I check it out, I check it in. We share as a community of developers working on this project. But it also works like the time machine, right? That's being able to go back to a change and figure out who made it, what was changed in it, opening up the files, depending on, the kind of project, you can go into the code and see the exact point where files were modified, where somebody accidentally deleted a semicolon that broke your game. Like you can see all that. And
Is
it's
that
not
kind of like
about
the Google's like or Google Docs where you can go into the version history there? Is it similar to that?
it's very similar, right? So you could see
Okay,
what
that
files
sounds
from
awesome.
who, what times. Yeah, it's incredibly handy. Like you really need to adopt it, especially if you want to do anything software related. And I would even argue art related. Like more artists should use it because it stores all your changes. And you don't have to worry about it. You just pay for a little
Well,
bit
how
of
does
the
that work? Because
cloud
I
or
thought, as like an artist, I thought like the best you would have is you open up your Photoshop document and you can see, the last 20 steps that you did. But you're talking about where it's like different versions of the file.
yeah. So for instance, if we're doing like a hero sculpt, right? And we're on version 1, which is let's say block out, right? The block out phase. You could save it and then put it up in the cloud, and then it's there in the cloud or in your file management. And then whether you have that, you save it locally or you delete it, it doesn't really matter. It's stored, right? And then you can keep working. And as you're working, if you accidentally, I don't know, dynamically subdivide, let's assume we're working with like ZBrush here, right? Like just twice, you accidentally hit it twice. And then as you're working, you're like, oh man, this is too intense. And then it saves and then it crashes. You can't undo that anymore because the crash is part of your history. You have to now go through a painstaking process of like, got to re-Dynamax or you got to tessellate and you got to like change all the wireframe and it wrecks your detail. And like, it's a pain in the ass. Excuse my language, but it's difficult even for artists. What the file management would let you do is to say, okay, I got everything to where I want it. I'm going to save it. I'm uploading at the end of the day. Here's my version for today. We're now version 1.3. This has these director's notes about the base shape of this character model. And then so you can actually record what you did every day or every time you submit, like a dev change log. But you could do that for
Yeah.
artists too, but most don't.
Well,
So
that sounds awesome though, because if I'm making 6 different characters and I gets to a point where I realize that 4 of them are going to be similar enough that I can go and grab like version 6 of the first one I did and skip like a whole bunch of steps to like start working on the other stuff. Like that seems like another great thing about file management. Or if I'm like writing some sort of code for something and I know like, hey, I've already done all the basics of this in this other version of this file over here, so I can go and like take a copy of that, and then you can save yourself time working on things through this too.
yeah, and that's usually where I see a lot of artists or just non-developers, how they'll use it is they'll use it as their storage place for templates, for stages of whatever their process is, just to speed up their own workflow. And it does make it really handy because you can go back and modify those templates as you learn new things without interfering with all of your currently made work. Right? You just like open up your template, be like, well, we learned that having edges like this was a terrible choice. We have to smooth all those out. So I'm going to modify my base template, put that back up on the file management. And now all the artists have that change, right? Everybody can pull from that template and get those learned lessons, if you will. And it's also great for directors, right? Director level people who are managing teams where they can go in and they can dictate, okay, here's the master folder where anytime you want to build off of something, these are the components or these are the parts or the base models or the texture files you're approved to use, right? You don't just grab random things you have on file, like this is the approved set. And if somebody comes along and is like, hey, we can improve this by doing this, that gives you as like a studio the space for your art director in this particular scenario to say, yes, this was a great change. I'm going to now go into that file because I'm responsible for it in terms of hierarchy, right? And I'm going to make that change. And now everybody can pull that change and the whole team benefits. Whereas if we're all working in our own individual computer spaces, right? Our local drives. Anything that we learn along the way, we don't share easily with other people, right? So ZBrush is a great example because I know a lot of teams will share custom UIs, right? Like here's the layout that's great for our particular pipeline. If you just have that on the file management as something that's managed by your version control software, anytime you modify that UI file, it'll update for the whole team every time they pull it. Whenever your art director is like, hey, this is an amazing tool, this is the script, this is how we're going to add it, he just submits that change. Everyone else can pull it from the library, and we all have this totally awesome UI now. And it took zero effort to set up. All we had to do is just say, yeah, this is the local drive for this folder, drop it in, and you're good to go.
All right, I'm sold on it. This is awesome. Let's just file manage everything.
Yeah, and so what I'm getting at with that point is a single source of truth, right? Which is just the idea that the master repository or depot is just the official state of things. So you can also tinker with files, right? You upload, let's say, some code for the UI, and I'm just trying to understand your code, but I also want to tinker with some stuff. I can grab your changes, mess around with them, change them, mess them up, do whatever I want to them. And then if I'm like, I don't want to save any of this, I'm just going to like overwrite my local copy with your last submission, and it just gets rid of all those changes. And then I didn't break anything. I didn't accidentally hit save or the autosave ran on the software and now that file is permanently damaged. That's not what the version control does. The version control will only update when you submit your file. So it gives you a bit of a barrier to be able to just go in and mess around, but not have lasting implications on like the rest of your team.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Then you mentioned at the start there was like Perforce and GitHub. From what we've talked about in previous episodes, I'm assuming those are I believe they were two of the main ones that seem to be used from what we've talked about.
There's quite a few actually, and there's a lot of open source ones as well with various names. But the two predominant ones, I guess, in just general for software development are Perforce and GitHub. GitHub is more general software, any kind of code really for anything, tools, scripts, you name it. It's really good that way. And Perforce, I would say, is probably industry standard. Like especially for big studio, like smaller studios will use GitHub or other containers that just hold or house all the data because it's easier, right? It's a small team. You don't need a high-end software necessarily to do that. But as soon as you start scaling up and you start getting into that higher team count, it becomes a lot harder to do that. You can't just share files through Google Drive anymore, right? It's hard. So yeah, and Perforce integrates really well with a lot of tools that are useful in development. Things like Swarm, which I believe they changed the name of that. Sorry, that is now Perforce Review, I think. So what that is kind of like a barrier. So you submit something, and then your leads or the assigned person who's going to review the code to make sure, I don't know, you're writing the way the team writes, all the copyright information is there, just like basic stuff like that. They can review it, look through all the files, highlight what they want changed or what they think would be a better way of doing something. And so it's like that peer-to-peer review, like, hey, is this accurate or could I add something more? Like there's tons of ways to use it. And then they can give approval. And once they give approval, then you could just say, yeah, commit it. And then Perforce Review will add it to the repository on your behalf, but we all know it's approved. Like I just didn't add it and now it's a part of the game. Like there's a layer of validation that happens. And that's built in. That kind of stuff is harder to do with GitHub. So which is why bigger studios will use Perforce. Every bigger project that I've worked on has always used Perforce.
Okay.
And it has a nice visual component.
So I always thought GitHub was like a public thing where you just uploaded something and anybody could access it. So there's like I'm assuming there's like, I don't know, locked versions of it, private versions of stuff on there too?
Yeah, paid tier. So GitHub free tier is purely open. Anybody could search it up. Anybody could stumble across your repository, open it up, pull all your data. They may not be able to submit anything, but they could see anything you worked on, which obviously if you're trying to make something for a commercial game, right, that's a huge no-no. It's like giving away your product for free.
So that's like the versions typically that I've seen for like, here's like a mod for a game and I can go and find it and download it from there. That's usually the free version.
Yeah, people don't care. They're like, whatever. That's open source, right? So GitHub is natively open source. Perforce is not. It's purely closed off. You need access to servers, passwords, user accounts, etc. A lot of people don't realize that Perforce does have an indie tier for developers. I haven't set one up in a while, so I'm fairly confident that they still have it. But it was limited to 5 users, right? So as long as you were willing to use at most 5 seats, 5 users, you would get access to the Perforce ecosystem for free. And it was all contained. You could do file management between each other, and it wouldn't cost you anything. They wouldn't charge you any money. Where they would charge you money is if you asked or you requested a cloud server, right? So it was free, assuming that, like, for instance, myself, if I set up an Indie Teams license on one of my servers in the office, it's free because it all runs through my own internet. It's based on our own architecture. If we needed more storage space, I have to manually add that storage space to that computer, kind of thing, right? If you wanted a cloud version, which means that, like, if there's a power outage or my network IP address changes or something along those lines and I'm not home to deal with them, everybody's out of luck until I get home and fix the problem. So the cloud version is what you pay for. It's like $30 a month for a cloud server and then an additional, well, sorry, I think it's 50, right? $50 a month for a cloud server plus per
So 30
seat.
American.
So yeah, 30 American, right? So, and then you paid per user that needs access, but it's cloud infrastructure. So you scale storage and the users you need as you need them. It still can be pretty expensive though, right? As soon as you start getting up to like I want to say the 10 to 15 user mark, you're probably looking at spending close to anywhere between $600 to $900 a month. USD. And a lot of that depends on bandwidth too. If it's a lot of tiny changes from everybody, it's not too bad. But the moment you're submitting huge chunks of code and you're recompiling like all the logic and everything and you're uploading that, the cost goes up dramatically because the servers have to process all that every time, right? Anywho, Perforce has a free version. That's my point. You can set it up locally if you know how to do that.
You're talented like James is.
Well, it's not that hard actually. Perforce has a really great documentation and tutorial now to do that. But you definitely need a static IP. For anybody who's not familiar with internet technologies, your modem has a public IP. This is important. It fluctuates, it changes all the time because it's not yours. You're just a guest on whatever your internet provider's network is, right? Which is why you can't host dedicated game servers at your house for your buddies. You can't do stuff like that, right? That's why we have cloud servers and like what's like all the game cloud stuff that when you want like a Minecraft server, you have to pay these people to set it up for you. That's why. It's because they have a static IP, which means it's an address assigned directly to your modem that is guaranteed to never change as long as you're paying for your account, your internet account, right? So like being a business, we have one. We have one that never changes. So that allows me I could spin up any kind of game server I want and give out the address to clients, to play testers, to people on the team if we're doing game nights, stuff like that. And we don't have to pay another company to do that. The only thing is I just need a computer that is on and running the server and it stays on for people to connect through. So that's the key difference. If you're just a public internet person, you're not going to be able to use it. You have to use a cloud. If you're paying for a business grade, whatever that looks like for your internet provider, and you have a static IP, that's when you can start doing stuff like self-hosted stuff, anything from websites to Perforce to you name it, even GitHub. And the technology of version control, I think, really came about because, like, do you remember sharing files through USB? Like the sticks, like
Yeah.
just being like, here's
back
my
in
here's my share of
high
the
school.
project, right? Yeah. So it's like version control was all about how to get rid of that, right? Like I remember, I don't know if you remember way back when we were in college for that program, my hard drive, I had to like tip it upside down and put like books on the cord so the power cord would like bend inside and get.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Yeah, right. It was like, so for context for other people, this was an external hard drive that came with its own dedicated power cable. And yeah, I had to flip it upside down and like do all this stuff so that it would align just right to stay on long enough for me to access my files. So given the context of our conversation so far, you could probably guess what happened. I lost all 400 gigs on it at the time, which back then was a ton of space, and I had the thing probably almost fully maxed out, and it was all gone, right? Like all of my earliest games were on that thing, all my earliest files, scripts, stuff I had learned, and that was brutal. And that was the first time where I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And then I started using Google Drive way back after that, and then I was like, this isn't going to work. And then eventually, yeah, I got exposed to Perforce and GitHub, and there's a few other ones. Perforce in general is great for heavy lifting, big file types, 4K textures, audio files, like the things that have huge data files. Perforce chews through that super fast, which is nice. And it's industry standard. So if you're an indie and you're thinking about one day, maybe I'm not going to be an indie forever and I'm going to need a job, being able to say you know Perforce and you know how to use it, that is something that could help you get hired, because teaching Perforce to people is hard. Yearly work with seniors of 10 plus years who they come onto the project, and you'll say, oh, we're using this version, and they'll be like, I hate this, can we use something else? And it's like, no, this is what the studio, this is what the client says, this is what we're using, and they don't want to use it. So being open-minded to it is good. As much as I'm touting Perforce, you don't have to stick with that one, but just understanding how the process and how it all works is great. GitHub and Perforce actually have really great integration with most game development environments. So Unreal Engine, things like that. So you could be inside the editor, look at an asset inside of Unreal, and it'll show you if it's got like a little red check plus sign, which means it's a local file that needs to go onto Perforce, like the server doesn't have it yet. And it also has a little green check mark to say, hey, this is yours. Or sorry, I believe it's green, right? This is yours. And then they have a red check mark for somebody else has it checked out. So even if I open this file and I change stuff, I can never send it to the depot because it belongs to somebody else. But you could see that inside of Unreal or Unity. Godot, I believe, has integration for those as well. It allows you to just see right away. It's like, oh, this file is actively being worked on. I shouldn't touch it, right? I think what a lot of people will struggle with is, like, now you understand the what, right? But it's the why use it. And as I mentioned, like, even seniors don't really fully understand the why. Sometimes they're just like, I'm good at what I do. Why does this matter? So one of the biggest benefits I think that comes from using something like this is fearless experimentation, right? You're not afraid to mess around. You're not afraid to open up a file and just, what does this do? Let's run it, compile. Oh man, the editor just crashed. Okay, I can't do that. Well, I'm just going to revert back from ground zero and I don't have to worry about it. And I can keep tinkering and try something else. It makes that rollback and iteration much, much more fluid and very risk-free. Like, you don't have to worry about getting it perfect. It doesn't matter, right? The perfect is on the depot. Right now, I could do whatever. I could do anything. Also, it's local. Nobody's going to really see what I'm doing. I'm just messing around. So yeah, you don't have to worry about breaking any of the files, basically. Accountability, right? And notes, right? A lot of people miss out on leaving proper comments, whether that's code or art or anything else, for your team. And when you're using version control, there's an option to make it so you cannot submit unless you've added comments. Like, there's a little section beside your commit where you can say, this is what I changed. Here's how it's changed. Here's, one of the things that I like to do when I'm using Hack and Plan or Jira or something like that is I'll put my task link, whatever that task is, I'll put that in the description so that when I'm uploading, I could say, yeah, this commit has this task and this task and this task. And then whoever's reviewing, or just the team at large, is like, why did James make this tool? Or why did James add this code in? This seems weird. They can go in and see, oh, actually, this was assigned to him by such and such person, right? Or some director, or somebody needed help. And so there's a paper trail to.
That's a nice way to tie it all in together.
Yeah, so it ties it together, and then it's nice, right? It's nice to see that reference, because a lot of times, especially when you go back 3, 6 months worth of like history, and I don't know why we did this. I don't know where it happened. So tying it together that way is just a good working tip, I guess, for anybody listening.
Well, what's really nice about that is because then whether someone's using Hack and Plan or something else, all of the information around why they were making it and what it was being used for or whatever, like that's already filled out and put in on whatever tracking software or Hack and Plan that they've got, and so now they don't have to go and re-put all of that information down into GitHub or Perforce or whatever. They can just do like what you were saying with the link. Like that is really
Yeah.
nice.
And it also saves you a lot of times, right? Not that people use it maliciously, but there are some bad managers out there, right? Bad leads. But in general, it's just nice to be able to give somebody an easy way to look at why, right? And then you don't have to worry about it. Somebody can come through and see, oh, this is why you made that change because our documentation said so is as per this task, right? This was 3 months ago, and we could see like it was only amended, let's say, last week. Well, of course, those changes aren't going to be reflected if your project manager never caught when that was supposed to be put through, or your producer, which happens all the time. There's tons of time where things change and they just weren't properly assigned to a developer or somebody who owns a feature or an asset or something along those lines, and it just slips through the cracks, right? That's why we see wrong textures, wrong models, things where people are like, "Oh yeah, this audio is properly assigned now." Well, it's because just somewhere through the thousands of tasks you have to do as a team, unslipped through and somebody missed it, and it was like, "Oops," you know. And unfortunately, a lot of times, especially when people are stressed out, the default is to look for blame, right? And even if you're not doing that as somebody who's in that like leadership style position, it's hard not to receive it like blame because somebody's coming to you and be like, oh, you missed this. And it's like, well, no, I didn't. This gives you a paper trail to feel confident and be like, well, I'm pretty sure I didn't. And I can see it and you can see it and everybody else on like the team can see it. This was just something that was missed. So it's a nice way to keep things kind of de-escalated as well. And other than that, just professionalism, right? Learning version control, it bridges that gap between a hobbyist and a professional, right? It teaches you how to work in a pipeline. It teaches you how the files communicate. And a lot of times when you're coming from game jams, right, into a professional setting, this is the kind of stuff you're not taught. You don't know version control because who in their right mind is going to go through the process of setting up version control for like a 3-day game jam or a 1-week game jam? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So a lot of people don't do it. But you're missing out on fundamental skills of understanding how people work together in a real work environment. And that's the one thing game jams are just unfortunately not great for. As great as I think they are, they're not great for teaching you that pipeline process. So yeah, being able to go into a recruiting meeting or an interview and be like, yeah, I understand how branches work in Perforce. I understand how submits work. I'm totally familiar with the UI, the graphical user interface. Like I know all those things. That's great because that means somebody doesn't have to handhold you and teach you, right? It's just here's the repository, go set it up. If you have any questions, then come bother us. So like sometimes that's a big win. Like I've spent entire afternoons with like 2 people. It's like 4 hours just helping them
Just
get
showing
set
them the
up,
basics of what
just
needs to be
showing them the
done.
basics. Yeah, it's just like download this, go to here, hopping on a call. And it's necessary sometimes. That's not a shot at anybody, or I'm not putting anybody down, but it's difficult and it takes up a lot of time. So being able to show up in that interview and be like, yes, I understand GitHub. Yes, I understand Perforce. It's even more impactful if you're not directly an engineer, right? You're an artist and you're like, yeah, I know how to use Perforce. I can use that with Unreal. That's no problem, right? Like that's a bonus perk. That's a nice perk to have. But like, feeling like a safety net, you have a safety net, I guess. It does change your whole mindset, right? So like, do you find you take creative risks when you know you have control Z, right?
Yeah, more often.
This is basically what this is, right? It's your control Z. So if you didn't have that, just like Like I would rather digitally paint than physically paint because I know when I screw up my physical paint, it's a lot harder to fix, right? It's harder to change things. But
Yeah, with the digital version,
Photoshop
you can redo that one arm, or the one line for the arm over and over and over and over again.
and over until you get it perfect. Yeah, right. But you're willing to experiment. So yeah, it's super important. Yeah, like hardware is temporary, I guess, right? Hard drives fail, laptops get coffee spilled on them, your cat steps on your keyboard. Like there's all kinds of stuff that happens, right? And if your game lives on your local machine and that kind of stuff happens, the way to think about it is you don't own your game. Like the laptop owns it. And if the laptop dies, you don't have a game, right? So version control is all about like, if this happens, where's my game? Well, it's inside my storage bucket or my Google Cloud, my Drive, or my Perforce, my GitHub. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if this computer crashes. Doesn't matter if it catches fire. I have all my work saved. I could just hop on a new computer, download the software, and keep going, right? Uh, and ransomware, right, is a big one. A lot of people talk about it, or corruption is like right on the same level. But mostly ransomware is horrible. Your project files can get corrupted, right? Especially in a complex engine. It happens, right? Perforce means that for GitHub, it's safely backed up on a remote server. And specifically around ransomware, there's companies out there who will get access to your files, to your laptop, to your computer if you're not careful. If even one of your own staff accidentally never changed their temporary password, which happens all the time, and somebody hacks their email account and they're like, well, we scraped their internet files and we found this temporary password to the server. Let's try it. Now they're inside your entire infrastructure, right? As a studio. That's how that happens. Well, it's one of the ways that can happen. And then what they do is they make changes so that they have your entire project. They delete history. They do whatever they can do to basically hold your project hostage. And then you get charged. They're like, yeah, we think you can give us $2 million for this. This is the value of it. You pay it and we'll release your files. And like some companies that I've met a lot of business owners where that's happened, where they're like, yeah, we just had to pay like 400,000 because there was no way we could survive without having access to our servers. And then once we got it back, we immediately like cloned repositories, deleted everything, and rebuilt the entire infrastructure, which costs, thousands more. But they never did proper setup. They never did the proper management to begin with. And this is why that scenario played out, right? So having that
That
backup is
sucks.
super important. Yeah, it really sucks. I've known several studios to shut down for this, where they put out a test build and for whatever reason the developer, put their API keys inside the code without a security vault, some form of like barrier config file, and then somebody got access to that in open source or managed to decompress it, right? And now they have it. Now they have a literal key into your server infrastructure. And yeah, it's brutal, but it's a fairly easy fix if you just approach it the right way when you start.
Through file management.
Yes. It also saves you from, I guess the other thing is like that whole polling stuff is if you accidentally delete something, I'm guilty for that. I'll just like grab a bunch of files I think I don't need, and then I'll accidentally like shift instead of control click or something. And it slams everything in between, but I'm not catching it. And then I'll hit delete. And I'm like, oh no, I just deleted like several subsystems or whatever. And I'm like, oh no. Like you don't have to panic. You just grab latest from your
Re-download.
repository and yeah, you have it all again. No big deal. But yeah, like I mean, if you're listening and your entire game is just sitting in a single folder on your drive, in a C drive, wherever your D drive, what's the first episode that they should take after this? Look up file management. Pick one. Get on it. Get on it. And that's what's the first tier in GitHub? 30 $30 a month. I don't quote me. I don't know. I haven't looked at it in forever, but that $30 a month, let's just say, right, is peace of mind. It's peace of mind for all these things that we talked about. That's a small price to pay compared to like ransomware, small price to pay from losing your entire project. I've met some developers who have gone like 2 years. They're ready for certification. They passed certification. The game's ready to go out. And then the project file corrupts like a week out from launch. Like that's happened to some developers, like some
No.
teams. Like, isn't that heartbreaking? Like, I can't even imagine, right? Like,
I would just cry.
just cry because like you can't even do anything about it. It's done. It's done. Yeah, spending a little bit of time, spending a little bit of money, save you a lot of heartache in the long run. And if you're so cash strapped, right, in the moment, you're still bootstrapping everything, you can't afford the servers, etc., that's fine. Then you know what? You can institute your own personal policies. Just every once in a while, grab your project, plug in a USB, an external hard drive, and just copy it, duplicate it over, and just like on a sticky note, right? This is something I used to do for some clients very early on when I first got started. And you just write on it. You just be like, here's the date, here's the version build, here's the software, here's the milestone, whatever. And then you just put it on a shelf. You're like, okay, that's our backup. That's May quarter two, 2023, sorry, 2026, right? Like this is quarter three. This is the backup build. And then we're going to keep working. And then later, I'm going to grab that same USB and I'm just going to update the build. Or some companies have multiple USB drives, right? Where they're just multiple hard drives. Every milestone, here's the build. We have it just in case. You can do it that way too. Version control is non-negotiable, right? Perforce handles the big files and it gives you peace of mind. And, it's free for up to 5 users, making it very accessible to indies and students, right? Yes, you have to figure out some
Also, we're not
hosting
sponsored.
stuff. Yeah, we're not sponsored. I
But we
wish
could be.
Perforce,
But we could be.
throw us a bone.
Hello.
Yeah. But yeah, right? Like, so Perforce is great. GitHub is great. There's also free open source alternatives, but they each have their own quirks. Like, you got to really take a look at them, right? And then just thanks for making it this far. If you have any questions, head to our Discord. Ping me. I'll answer.
And if you're someone who's like, I've never needed it, I've never had any problems, there's never been an issue, then genuinely I'm happy for you. But for everybody else.
Yeah. We'll see you when it happens. Yeah.